Some people don't realize they're paving their own downfall until it's too late. I'm reviewing job applications in my sleek office when a familiar name catches my eye. The very boss who once belittled me is now desperate for work. I smile quietly, knowing I decide his future now. I remember that day vividly, the day I gathered every ounce of courage to ask for the raise I so desperately deserved. I had worked tirelessly for years, always going the extra mile, and I believed that my dedication would finally be recognized. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, I walked into the office meeting, my mind set on speaking up. The room was filled with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of crisp business papers, an environment that suddenly felt cold and unforgiving. I took a deep breath and began to outline my contributions, listing the projects I had led, the challenges I had overcome, and the profits I had helped generate. Every word came out carefully, with the hope that my efforts would be seen as valuable. But then, as I finished speaking, my boss's face contorted into a look of dismissive disdain. He interrupted with a scoff, his tone dripping with arrogance, and declared in front of everyone, "You're lucky to even have a job. If you don't like it, leave." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. The room fell into a heavy silence as my colleagues exchanged glances, some pitying me, others snickering softly behind their hands. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, a burning mix of embarrassment and anger as the cold, impersonal lighting of the office seemed to spotlight my humiliation. I stood there feeling utterly small and unworthy, every whispered remark and every sidelong glance reinforcing the message that I was nothing more than a replaceable cog in their machine. In that instant, the weight of years of being taken for granted pressed down on me. I had always given my best, yet my hard work was met with contempt. The sting of rejection, the sound of my boss's callous words, and the echo of laughter that followed me out of that meeting became a constant reminder of how low they had set my worth. I remember clenching my fists so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and the cold draft from the air conditioner felt like a mocking caress on my skin. I left the meeting feeling as though the very ground beneath me had shifted. I could still taste the bitterness of his words and feel the chill of the office as I made my way to my desk. Every step was heavy, burdened by the realization that my dreams and hard work had been dismissed in a single careless moment. I replayed the scene in my mind repeatedly, each replay a loop of pain and humiliation that seared itself into my memory. Yet, as I sat there amidst the quiet hum of computers and the soft rustle of papers, a quiet resolve began to stir inside me. That day, when he declared that I was lucky just to exist, I silently vowed to myself that I would not let his words define me. I promised that if he thought I was unworthy, he would soon see the error of his ways. I whispered under my breath, "Fine, let's see who really needs who in the end." Those words, though barely audible in the sterile silence of that office, marked the beginning of my transformation. I knew then that the humiliation I suffered was not the end of my story. It was merely the catalyst for the powerful comeback that was about to unfold. The sting of that day, the cold indifference in his voice, would fuel every step I took toward a future where my worth was finally recognized, where I was not just a replaceable employee but a force to be reckoned with. I sank into a relentless spiral of despair, where every day felt like another chapter in a story of crushing defeat. The rejection had been so complete that not only was my financial stability in ruins, but every opportunity for advancement seemed to vanish into thin air. I watched my paycheck dwindle month after month, each notice of unpaid bills serving as a stark reminder of how worthless I had been made to feel. The job I once dedicated my heart and soul to was now a dead end, a place where every effort I made was met with cold indifference. My boss's dismissal echoed in my mind with every attempt I made to build a better life. He had not only refused to give me a raise, but he had also sabotaged my future by ensuring I was blacklisted in our industry. Every door I knocked on for a new opportunity slammed shut before I even had a chance to speak. Former colleagues, once friends, now avoided my calls and shut me out, convinced by his lies that I was nothing without him. The rejection wasn't just professional, it seeped into every part of my life, leaving me isolated and questioning my self-worth. In the quiet hours of the night, I would sit alone in my tiny apartment, the cold floor beneath me and the feeble light of a dying bulb overhead, while the emptiness of my nearly barren fridge gnawed at me. Each moment was punctuated by the harsh reality of ramen dinners and the bitter taste of disappointment that no luxury could ever replace. The silence of my empty room was deafening, each tick of the clock a reminder that time was passing, but nothing was changing. I felt an overwhelming weight in my chest, a deep-seated belief that perhaps I was never meant for more, that all the hard work, the sacrifices, and the hope I had clung to were futile. I began to wonder if my boss was right all along, if I was nothing more than a cog in his machine, destined to remain in the shadows of mediocrity. The constant barrage of rejection emails, the dismissive glances of those who once admired my dedication, all compounded my self-doubt until I nearly forgot who I was. But in the depths of that isolation, as I sat in the dim glow of my laptop at 3 a.m., something shifted inside me. Staring at the flickering screen and the peeling paint on my wall, I realized that I had two choices: continue to be defined by their relentless dismissal, or break free and forge a path of my own. In that raw, vulnerable moment, as the stale air filled my lungs and the taste of cold coffee lingered on my tongue, I made a vow to myself. I whispered into the quiet darkness, "If no one will give me a chance, I'll create my own." Those words, though barely audible, carried the weight of every tear shed and every ounce of hope that had once been crushed. The turning point was not dramatic or instantaneous. It was a slow and steady surge of determination that built up over countless lonely nights. I began to scour every resource available, reading success stories, watching motivational speeches, and taking online courses, to remind myself that I was capable of more than the confines of that dead-end job. I reached out to former mentors and searched for new opportunities, even if they seemed small at first. Every bit of progress, no matter how minute, felt like a victory over the oppressive doubt that had once defined me. I started to see that the very rejection I had suffered was not a mark of my inadequacy, but a catalyst for a revolution in my life. With every new idea and every small success, I pieced together a vision for a future that I controlled entirely. The loneliness of my apartment and the coldness of its dim light gradually transformed into a crucible of resolve. I began drafting business plans, creating a roadmap that would lead me out of the darkness and into a world where my worth was finally recognized. In those silent moments, as I wrestled with my doubts and fears, I also discovered a wellspring of strength I had never known. The sting of each closed door, the echoes of every dismissive word, they all became fuel for my determination. I understood that while they had taken everything from me, they could never take away the power to rebuild. The life I had once imagined was not lost forever. It was simply waiting for me to claim it again, on my own terms. And so, with a newfound clarity and resolve, I began to map out my comeback. I refused to be a victim of their neglect any longer. Every rejection was a challenge, every setback a lesson in resilience. I made a silent promise in that cold, lonely room, a promise that if they wanted to see me fail, they would soon witness my rise. The darkness that once enveloped me now served as the backdrop for my determination, and I vowed to turn that despair into the foundation of a future I would build from scratch. If no one will give me a chance, I'll create my own. I began to rebuild my life from the depths of nothingness, driven by a determination that burned away the remnants of my past. Every morning before the sun even peeked over the horizon, I forced myself to rise with a clear purpose, to create a future entirely my own. In those early hours, the world was quiet and still, a blank canvas on which I could start anew. Began with small, deliberate steps, taking on odd jobs and freelance projects that, though insignificant at first, formed the building blocks of my recovery. Each task was a victory, each completed project a reminder that I still had value and that my efforts mattered. The early days were relentless. I spent countless hours working in a tiny makeshift office where the only company I had was the steady hum of my computer and the soft glow of a desk lamp. I would push myself to work late into the night, fueled by the memory of every rejection and every hurtful word. Every keystroke was like a small act of rebellion, a silent declaration that I was reclaiming my worth. I took no breaks, pouring all my energy into learning new skills, drafting proposals, and reaching out to potential clients. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, when my eyes burned from staring at the screen for too long. Yet each time I reminded myself that these small victories, however modest, were proof that I could turn the tide. I knew that rebuilding wasn't just about working harder. It was about reinventing every part of myself. I started by changing the way I looked and thought about myself. I updated my wardrobe, choosing outfits that made me feel powerful and confident, rather than tired and invisible. Looking in the mirror, I began to see not the person who had been repeatedly overlooked, but a new version of me, a person ready to seize every opportunity with a fierce, unyielding spirit. I replaced old habits with new ones, dedicating time each day to exercise, meditation, and reading. The burn in my muscles after a rigorous workout became a symbol of the hard-won strength I was building, and the quiet moments of reflection helped me regain a sense of clarity about my future. I dove headfirst into learning. I enrolled in online courses, attended workshops, and consumed every piece of knowledge that could help me transform my career. I immersed myself in subjects that had once seemed out of reach, from digital marketing to entrepreneurship, and slowly began to piece together a business plan that was entirely my own. I reached out to mentors, people who had once faced their own setbacks and emerged victorious, and listened to their advice with gratitude. Each new lesson, each small bit of wisdom fueled a growing belief in my own potential. I started to see that every rejection, every closed door, had been a necessary part of my journey, preparing me for the breakthrough that was just around the corner. Networking became my lifeline. I began attending local meetups and industry events, initially with a mix of apprehension and determination. I introduced myself to people I once thought were unreachable, and I shared my story with raw honesty. I wasn't seeking pity. I was forging connections with those who believed in growth and resilience. Every handshake, every exchange of business cards was a small affirmation that I was not defined by my past. Slowly, I built a network of supporters who saw the fire in my eyes and the unwavering commitment in my actions. One evening, after a particularly grueling day filled with back-to-back meetings and relentless pitches, I attended a small business mixer. The room was alive with conversation, the gentle clink of glasses, and a soft murmur of ideas shared over coffee. I walked into that room feeling both nervous and exhilarated, my heart pounding with the anticipation of a fresh start. As I moved among the crowd, I felt the subtle change in how people looked at me, a mixture of curiosity and respect that I had never experienced before. At one point, a former colleague approached me, eyes wide with disbelief, and said, "Wow, I almost didn't recognize you." Those words, simple and sincere, hit me like a revelation. They confirmed that I was no longer the person who had been taken for granted. I had transformed into someone entirely new, a person who commanded attention and respect. Every new contract I signed, every glowing review from a client, was a brick in the foundation of my new life. I began to receive invitations to speak at events and even to collaborate on projects that were once beyond my wildest dreams. The thrill of these successes was electrifying. The crisp sound of a freshly printed contract, the buzz of notifications on my phone, and the steady rhythm of progress that pulsed through my veins. I had not only reclaimed my worth, but was also actively rewriting my future. The world began to notice me, and with every small victory, I felt the power of my own determination build stronger. There were days when the scars of my past would flare up, when a memory of neglect or a stray remark would try to pull me back into darkness. But each time, I reminded myself that those were just echoes of a life that no longer defined me. I learned to see every challenge as an opportunity, every setback as a stepping stone towards something greater. I celebrated my progress, no matter how small, and I never lost sight of the fact that I was creating a new narrative, a narrative of resilience, strength, and unwavering self-worth. Slowly but surely, my business began to take shape. I rebranded myself, created a new online presence, and let my work speak for itself. Every day I grew more confident, more assured in the knowledge that I was destined for success. I started to share my journey publicly, inspiring others with my story of transformation. The once lonely hours spent working in isolation turned into a symphony of progress, a constant reminder that I was building something truly extraordinary. By the time I closed another successful deal, I looked back at my journey and felt a deep, fulfilling sense of pride. I had turned every bitter memory into a source of strength, and every hardship had become the fuel that powered my ascent. I was no longer defined by the neglect of the past. I had carved out a future that was entirely my own. And as I stood at the threshold of this new life, I whispered to myself with quiet triumph, "They laughed at me then, but soon they'll know my name." With that promise echoing in my heart, I stepped boldly into a tomorrow filled with endless possibilities. My business began to flourish in ways I never thought possible. Every day, as my reputation grew, I could feel the energy of success coursing through every deal and every meeting. Invitations to high-profile events poured in, and soon I was rubbing shoulders with influential leaders who admired my relentless drive. Every handshake and every approving nod was a quiet declaration that I had reclaimed my worth, turning every previous rejection into a stepping stone toward something much greater. The buzz of my new reality was tangible. The flash of cameras at press events, the crisp sound of freshly printed contracts, and the unmistakable scent of success that filled the room every time I stepped into a boardroom. It was a stark contrast to the days when I was dismissed and overlooked, and now the world saw me as a rising force. Meanwhile, the man who once held the power over my future was beginning to feel the full weight of his own choices. His arrogance, which had once allowed him to deny me a raise and belittle my efforts, was now catching up with him. I started hearing whispers among industry insiders about his poor financial decisions, about how clients were leaving his company, and how his reputation was slowly crumbling. The very tactics he used to keep me in line, dismissive remarks and cold indifference, had now become the very tools of his downfall. I could see it in the fading confidence of his voice when he spoke on conference calls, and in the way his emails grew increasingly desperate and poorly worded. Every time I received a notification on my phone, a brief message, a stray email with a subject line that hinted at trouble, I felt a cold satisfaction. It was as if every failure of his was a small victory for me. At one major industry gala, the difference was undeniable. I took the stage to introduce a groundbreaking project that had been years in the making, and the room erupted in applause. The elegant hum of conversations, the soft clink of champagne glasses, and the gentle flash of camera lights all testified to the success I had built. I could feel the cool touch of my designer watch on my wrist, a reminder of the hours, the sweat, and the determination that had brought me here. Every nod of respect from influential figures, every congratulatory word from former critics who now admired my journey, solidified my position as someone who had transformed pain into power. In that same moment, as I mingled with top executives and influential investors, I noticed my phone light up with a message. It was from him, the boss who had once refused to acknowledge my worth, now sending a desperate plea for help. The message was brief, laced with regret and a tone that bordered on panic, as if he were clinging to a past that had long since faded into insignificance. I held the phone for a moment, feeling the cool metal against my skin, and I could almost taste the irony. Here I was, celebrated for every milestone and every small victory, while he was left to drown in his own mistakes. Every congratulatory message I received, every positive review that came my way, was a reminder that I had built my future on my own terms. At the gala, as I walked through the room, I saw a familiar glimmer of despair in his eyes when he caught sight of me. The once commanding figure now seemed reduced to a shadow, his presence barely noticeable amidst the glow of my success. Every whispered remark in the room, every sideways glance, confirmed that the tables had turned completely. I could sense the shifting dynamics as influential people gathered around me, discussing my achievements with a tone of genuine admiration and respect. It was a powerful, almost tangible energy, a living, breathing testament to the fact that my journey had redefined everything. Every detail, from the crisp rustle of my business suit to the soft hum of conversation and the steady rhythm of applause, served as a reminder that my transformation was not just personal, but public. I was no longer a forgotten employee or a dismissed voice. I had become a beacon of determination and success, someone who had taken every setback and turned it into an opportunity. And while he struggled to piece together his failing career, I continued to build bridges, forge new alliances, and create a legacy that would outlast any temporary downfall. As I stood there, amidst the swirling lights and approving murmurs, I felt the immense weight of every moment that had led me here. I knew that the power shift was complete. I was in control of my destiny, and every rejection, every dismissive word from the past had only made my victory that much sweeter. Now, as I scrolled through my notifications and saw his desperate message once more, I smiled quietly. He had thought I'd be waiting for his apology, but I had already moved on. I was the architect of my own future, and he was left to face the consequences of his own choices. And so, with each new opportunity that came my way, I stepped further, into a world where I was unstoppable, leaving behind a legacy built on my own strength and resilience. I stepped into a crowded charity gala, every step measured and resolute. The room buzzed with hushed conversations, the soft clink of champagne glasses, and the muted rustle of elegant attire. I could feel every eye in the room fix on me as I navigated through the throng of influential guests. Tonight, I wasn't here to celebrate charity. I was here to confront the man who once shattered my world, the one who thought I'd never leave him behind. Across the room, I spotted him, my husband, his posture slumped, his eyes searching the crowd as if seeking forgiveness in every glance. The once confident man now wore the unmistakable look of desperation and regret. His presence was a stark reminder of a past I had long left behind, a time when his indifference had cut deeper than any betrayal. I could almost taste the irony in the air, a bitter tang that mixed with the soft perfume of expensive cologne and the distant hum of polite laughter. He hesitated at the edge of the room, and for a moment the lively chatter faded into a heavy silence. I watched as he took a few tentative steps toward me, his every move betraying a deep-seated uncertainty. I remembered the countless nights when I had planned my escape, when every dismissive word and every cold shoulder had fueled my determination to reclaim my life. Now, here he was, standing before me, hoping to mend a bridge that he had so carelessly burned. As he approached, his voice trembled with a mix of fear and regret. I never thought you'd really leave," he stammered, his tone barely above a whisper. His words hung in the air like a fragile plea, desperate and unconvincing. I met his gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch out between us until it felt like the weight of every past betrayal pressed down on the space. The room, once filled with idle chatter, seemed to lean in, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. I took a slow, measured breath and spoke, my voice calm yet laced with the quiet strength of hard-earned independence. "You once believed I was trapped, destined to endure your neglect and selfish choices. But you forgot one crucial thing. I don't lose." My words were not raised in anger. They were delivered with a cool finality, each syllable a testament to the years I spent rebuilding my life from the ashes of your indifference. The look on his face shifted rapidly, from hopeful desperation to a dawning realization that he was no longer in control. I could see the flicker of regret in his eyes as he searched mine for any sign of the vulnerability he once exploited, but all he found was unwavering resolve. The hushed murmur of the crowd grew louder, as if every attendee was absorbing the weight of my declaration. I could feel the soft rustle of elegant fabrics and the distant clink of crystal, underscoring that this was no longer about us alone. It was a public revelation of my triumph over your betrayal. He tried to speak again, his voice cracking with the effort to salvage what little pride he had left. "Please, I was wrong. I'm so sorry," he pleaded, his words tumbling out in a desperate jumble that betrayed his inner chaos. For a moment, the room held its breath, each eye locked on me as if waiting for my response to this feeble attempt at reconciliation. I paused, letting the silence carve a space between us. A space filled with every moment I had suffered, every time I had been dismissed, every tear that had watered my determination. Then, with a quiet intensity that resonated through the stillness, I said, "You thought I'd be waiting for your apologies, that I'd be broken enough to let you back in. But I built my life while you were busy taking me for granted. I created something far greater from the ashes of your indifference." My voice was soft but carried a powerful echo that silenced any further protest. The shift in power was complete. Around us, the room filled with whispers of approval, and the subtle nods of influential guests who recognized the transformation that had taken place. I could sense that every person present, from the quiet observer in the corner to the polished executive on stage, now saw the undeniable truth. I was no longer defined by your failures, nor by the pain you caused. I had reclaimed my dignity, my self-worth, and my future. In that charged moment, as I looked at you, a man reduced to desperation and regret, I realized that the ultimate revenge was not in dragging you down, but in rising above everything you represented. I could feel the cool weight of my newfound freedom, the strength that came from years of rebuilding a life that was entirely my own. Every whisper, every approving glance affirmed that I had emerged victorious. With a final, measured look, I turned away, each step echoing the unyielding promise that I was in control of my destiny. I left behind a man who once believed he could keep me down, a man who now had nothing left to grasp. And as I walked out into the night, the soft click of my heels on the polished floor was the sound of a life reborn, a future secured by my own unbreakable will. He thought I'd take him back. He thought I still cared. He was so wrong. I stand at the threshold of a life redefined, a life built on the unwavering strength that came from walking away when I had nothing left to lose. Every painful moment of abandonment, every bitter tear, shed in silence, has transformed into the foundation of my newfound freedom. My heart, once heavy with regret and longing, now beats with a rhythm of self-respect and unbreakable resolve. I've built a future where my worth is measured by my own fierce determination, and not by the empty promises of a man who once thought I'd never leave. Looking back, I see how every neglectful whisper and every dismissive act was a stepping stone to this liberating moment. The echoes of his desperate calls and frantic messages are now distant, fading away into the background of a world that celebrates my independence. I have learned that true power comes not from clinging to someone who took me for granted, but from having the courage to let go and pursue my own dreams. The scars of our past no longer bind me. They are reminders of the strength I gained through pain. As I walk away from the remnants of that shattered marriage, I feel the warmth of genuine love and respect from those who truly value me. The soft glow of the evening lights and the gentle murmur of voices around me speak of a future filled with promise, a future that is mine alone to shape. I no longer dwell in the shadow of his regret or his desperate attempts to win me back. Instead, I step forward into a world where my heart is light, where my laughter is unburdened, and where I finally know that I am complete without him. I whisper to myself with quiet finality, the best revenge isn't in making him suffer. It's in proving I never needed him to be whole. And with that, I leave behind the echoes of a painful past, walking boldly into the future, a future where I stand unbreakable, and he remains a fading memory of a time when I was not strong enough to leave.